Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio, and I'm your host, Michael Clogs. We've got two segments today. One is the Auditor General speaking about, after auditing what happened during the pandemic and examining waste, overages, overpayments to people who may or may not have been eligible for the money. There was a lot going on, and a lot that probably could have been done better. It could be evidence that maybe the Prime Minister could have slowed down for a second and planned things out a little more rather than just rushing and pushing forward the way he did to come up with tools to help people for the pandemic. There may have been a different path for him to take in order to make sure that the people stayed safe, and along with that being safe doesn't just mean the vaccinations and protecting them from the disease. It's also protecting them from things like evictions and homelessness, ensuring that the prices for food and things like that stayed level. And in the end, what we have now, because of a lot of the programs that were put in place, we have massive inflation. But I will say this much, that massive inflation isn't just hitting Canada, it is also hitting other countries in North America and countries around the world. Many countries in Europe are also experiencing higher rates of inflation because of programs that were put in place to protect people during the pandemic, to make sure that they weren't just put out onto the streets, to slow the progress of homelessness and things like that. So let's listen to what the Auditor General had to say in a few minutes. We also have a segment with RoseAnne Archibald, where she is speaking about her role as the National Chief for First Nations. And she's going to give a speech about what it is that she wants to do for the First Nations people and how she is there for them. The Assembly of First Nations National Chiefs, RoseAnne Archibald delivers opening remarks as a group holds a 3-day special assembly of chiefs in Ottawa from December 6th to December 8th. She references and continues the continuing turmoil at the AFN and announces that Murray Sinclair, the former senator who served as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, will be assisting with conflict resolution and mediation. He will begin his work with the organization in early 2023. The AFN's Executive Committee and National Board of Directors suspended Archibald with pay June 17, 2022, depending on the outcome of an investigation into 4 complaints made against her by staff. She was reinstated as National Chief following a vote at the AFN General Assembly in July. That does bring us to one of the things that women, because being a National Chief, that's also a political position that women in politics in Canada do face a lot of bullying and a lot of poking and discrimination that some people will actually see it as, she's a woman, how could she have gotten that position? And it's something in our society that we should be bringing to an end, as everyone should be seen as an equal person, regardless of gender, regardless of anything else other than the fact that we are all human beings. So let's listen to the Auditor General give her report and speak with a statement to the press about what she saw with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and also listen to RoseAnne Archibald speak about her role as National Chief and how they're going to come up with new conflict resolution systems within the AFN.
Have been killed since 24th of February 2022, including 419 children. However, I think we all know that the real toll is far greater. WHO reports at least 715 attacks on healthcare in the country, including 630 that impacted health facilities and 61 that affected personnel. These attacks in Ukraine represent more than 70% of all attacks on health infrastructure in the world. Since February, 1,148 children have been killed or injured, while millions have fled, uprooted from their homes, separated from their families, or put at risk of violence. And Madam President, of course, winter has now arrived in Ukraine. Temperatures are already below freezing and are expected to drop to below minus 20 degrees Celsius. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including power stations and heating plants, have left millions of people without access to heat, electricity, and water, adding another dangerous dimension to the humanitarian crisis caused by the war. As a result of the attacks on civilian infrastructure, people are being deprived of healthcare and children deprived of education. In Ukraine today, the ability of civilians to survive is under attack. Amid freezing temperatures and destruction, people at the highest risk are already vulnerable, among them the elderly, those with disabilities, and the many millions displaced to which I referred earlier, essentially because of a lack of basic services. International humanitarian law speaks for itself. Objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population must be protected. Constant care must be taken to spare civilians and civilian objects throughout all military operations. Gender-based violence, targeting women and girls, continues to be pervasive, and we are very clear underreported. Madam President, our work is to safeguard lives and preserve dignity. The humanitarian community is committed still to stay and deliver, and almost 690 humanitarian organizations, partners, the majority of which are local frontline organizations, have and continue to provide life-critical aid and protection to 13.5 million people in Ukraine. And I don't apologize for this stream of really terrifying statistics. These people in the 690 humanitarian agencies continue to work against the clock to support civilians. And over the past few months in that context, in preparation for the winter, humanitarians have provided more than 630,000 civilians with different kinds of direct winter assistance, and 400 generators have been distributed to critical facilities. Since October, the sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have created a new level of need that impacts the whole country and exacerbates and increases the needs caused by the war. The scale of the destruction of the electrical and heating infrastructure requires the international community's enhanced support to the government of Ukraine beyond what humanitarians can provide. And indeed, there are discussions to this end in Kyiv and elsewhere. In recent weeks, more areas have become accessible in eastern and southern oblasts, allowing humanitarians to reach entirely new communities with assistance, and we're grateful for this. Our teams are responding. Interagency convoys are moving to bring aid to areas where Ukraine has recently regained control. In Kherson, for example, convoys have delivered much-needed drinking water, potable water for thousands of civilians, medical supplies to treat 100,000 people for up to 3 months, and assistance for women and girls' reproductive health. And food assistance has been delivered in Kherson for nearly 100,000 civilians. Humanitarians working to respond to gender-based violence, including in particular local women's organizations, also are seeking to scale up the delivery of essential services for their clients. An integrated network of spaces and providers has been delivering survivor-centered services for women and girls, boys and men who have been subject to gender-based violence. And these efforts and activities, which began at the beginning of the war, continue. 765,000 children. It's very difficult to imagine this. 765,000 children have received psychosocial support to help them deal with the effects of war and displacement. Mobile teams are operating in centers for internally displaced and identifying, registering, assessing, and providing direct support to children with protection needs. None of this would be possible without the unprecedented member state and other donor support to the Ukraine Flash Appeal. And to date, we have received, as a result of that generosity, $3.1 billion of the $4.3 billion requested through the end of this year. To date, we have transferred almost $1 billion in humanitarian cash transfers to about 4.3 million people. Cash as a mode of delivery has come to its maturity in the case of the tragic events in Ukraine. More must be done, of course, to continue to close the funding shortfall, and we will soon be issuing plans for 2023. While there have been improvements, as I've said, in humanitarian access, the biggest challenge remains impediments to reaching areas in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. Discussions continue between the UN and the parties to facilitate unimpeded access in those areas. It's vital that we get the convoys through to deliver relief items. OCHA has, as we have discussed in this chamber, a presence in Moscow, and I continue personally to engage key interlocutors for access in Moscow, in Kyiv, and in meetings elsewhere. Today, of the 13.5 million people who have been reached with assistance since February, 1 million of them are in areas outside government of Ukraine control. They have been reached thanks to humanitarian partners positioned still in areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, where humanitarian operations had begun, of course, since 2014 as a result of the invasion. While we continue to provide support in these regions through these local partners, and there are still international staff in those areas, our response is neither regular nor at the right scale. Under IHL, again, all parties should allow, facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief for civilians in need, and must ensure that their personnel have the freedom of movement required for their work. In areas where the government of Ukraine has recently regained control, the presence of landmines and explosive remnants of war is a major concern for communities and, of course, for humanitarians who serve them, and causes delay and impediments for the restoration of essential services, including electricity. States must bolster their support for clearance to prevent further casualties of these mines. This will ensure quicker, more effective access to livelihoods and essential services. And information on mines and used or abandoned explosive ordnance should be shared by those who know at the earliest possible time. Madam President, last week in Geneva, I launched the Global Humanitarian Overview, which is our annual assessment of global humanitarian needs for next year and how to respond to them. At the beginning of 2022, 274 million people needed humanitarian assistance. For 2023, the projected number has grown to 339 million, from 274 million to 339 million, an increase of about 24%. 65 million people have arrived at our doorstep, 1 in 23 people on this planet. And as we have said publicly, that's a population the size of the third most populous country in the world. This is a record appeal, and it would be difficult to get them adequate funding, but it's a stark reminder of how fast humanitarian needs are accelerating. And this is especially true for Ukraine. So I end partly about Ukraine, of course, and the urgent needs that we see as we move into winter, and as we see the damage to infrastructure, and as we see the potential for more displacement. But I place that within that larger context of a world gone mad, which sees 1 in 23 people in need of humanitarian assistance around the globe. It's a picture which is unimaginable. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Griffiths for his briefing. I now give the
Bonjour, bon mardi à tous. Je suis Boris Proulx, journaliste parlementaire au journal Le Devoir, et bienvenue à cette conférence de presse de Karen Hogan, la vérificatrice générale du Canada, sur les rapports déposés ce matin. I'm Boris Proulx, reporter for Le Devoir, and welcome to this press conference with Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, regarding the report tabled this morning. We will have a few remarks from the Auditor General, and then we will go for a question period. So if you are listening on Zoom, please use the raise hand function during the press conference, and we'll come to you after the questions in the room. Donc si vous êtes sur Zoom, utilisez la fonction lever la main à tout moment durant la conférence de presse, et nous allons vous donner la parole après les quelques questions dans la salle. So on that, here to you, here's to you, Auditor General.
Merci. Bonjour et merci de vous joindre à moi. J'aimerais d'abord souligner que nous nous trouvons sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler des résultats de nos 2 plus récents audits relatifs à la COVID-19. Ce dépôt portera à 11 le nombre de rapports liés à la COVID-19 que nous avons livrés depuis le début de la pandémie au Canada, il y a maintenant plus de 2 ans. The 9 COVID-19 audits we delivered in 2021 looked at the government's actions to respond to the pandemic and at whether federal organizations were prepared to deal with a large-scale public health emergency. With the audits we are releasing today, the focus of our work is shifting to look at how federal departments and organizations managed programs and services for Canadians as the pandemic continued to evolve. Our first audit examined how the federal government procured and distributed vaccines to the provinces and territories to immunize Canadians against COVID-19. In Canada, public health is a shared responsibility between the federal government, the provinces, and the territories. Dans l'ensemble, nous avons constaté que l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada et Santé Canada, avec le soutien de Services publics et approvisionnement Canada, avaient travaillé ensemble pour répondre à l'urgence de la pandémie. Ils ont obtenu des vaccins contre la COVID-19 pour pouvoir immuniser plus rapidement possible l'ensemble de la population canadienne. En 2020, Services publics et approvisionnement Canada a conclu des ententes d'achat anticipés avec 7 sociétés qui avaient le potentiel de produire des vaccins viables. En concluant ces ententes, le gouvernement augmentait ses chances d'obtenir assez de doses pour fournir le plus vaste programme d'immunisation de l'histoire du pays, tout en reconnaissant que cette approche pourrait entraîner un surplus de doses si tous les vaccins étaient un jour approuvés. Santé Canada a ajusté son processus d'autorisation habituel pour accélérer l'approbation réglementaire des vaccins contre la COVID-19. Entre décembre 2020 et mai 2022, le gouvernement fédéral s'est procuré 169 millions de doses de vaccins. Plus de 84 millions d'entre elles ont été administrées par les provinces et les territoires à des personnes admissibles partout au Canada. En moyenne, l'Agence de la santé publique a livré les vaccins 2 jours après qu'une province ou un territoire les ait demandés. Cette livraison était rapide, étant donné les exigences logistiques qui entrent en jeu lorsqu'il s'agit de livrer à des endroits parfois éloignés des matières sensibles aux variations de température. While the organizations involved were successful in securing vaccines and quickly distributing them to the provinces and territories, the Public Health Agency of Canada's efforts to minimize wastage were unsuccessful. By the end of May 2022, Canada had 32.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, estimated to be worth about $1 billion in federal, provincial, and territorial inventories. Another 50.6 million doses were deemed surplus and offered for donation. We found that the agency's ability to reduce wastage was affected by delays in implementing important functionalities of Vaccine Connect, the information technology system meant to help manage COVID-19 vaccines. We also found that the Public Health Agency did not have finalized data sharing agreements with the provinces and territories. As a result, it struggled to effectively share detailed case-level safety surveillance data with Health Canada, the World Health Organization, and vaccine companies. Nous avons soulevé les problèmes d'échange de données sur la santé entre les autorités de santé fédérales, provinciales et territoriales en 1999, en 2002, en 2008 et plus récemment en 2021 dans notre audit de la préparation en cas de pandémie. Il est urgent de remédier à ces problèmes de longue date, notamment en mettant en œuvre un cadre pan-canadien d'échange d'informations, car l'échange de données sur la santé est au cœur d'une surveillance efficace pour assurer la sécurité de la population canadienne. Je vais passer maintenant au second audit que nous avons publié aujourd'hui. Il porte sur plusieurs programmes de soutien pour les personnes face à la COVID-19 et aussi sur la subvention salariale d'urgence du Canada qui offrait un soutien aux employeurs. Tous ces programmes sont des mesures que le gouvernement a mises en place pour atténuer l'incidence de la pandémie de COVID-19 sur la santé de la population canadienne, des entreprises et de l'économie du pays. Overall, we found that the Canada Revenue Agency and Employment and Social Development Canada effectively delivered COVID-19 programs to provide quick financial relief to individuals and employers affected by the pandemic. In this way, they served to prevent an increase in poverty and income inequalities and helped the economy bounce back. In 2020, the government decided to rely on information provided by applicants and limit prepayment controls to expedite helping people and employers affected by the pandemic. In doing so, it recognized that there was a risk that some payments would go to ineligible recipients. We found that overpayments of $4.6 billion were made to ineligible individuals, and we estimated that at least $27.4 billion of payments to individuals and employers should be investigated further. The Canada Revenue Agency and Employment and Social Development Canada recognized the need for increased post-payment verification work with the early decision to limit prepayment controls. As the pandemic continued to evolve, the post-payment verifications were delayed. The number of post-payment verifications included in the plans is insufficient to address all payments at risk of being ineligible. The agency and the department are not planning to verify payments made to all identified recipients who may not be eligible for COVID-19 benefit programs. Les efforts déployés jusqu'à présent en vue de recouvrer les montants exigibles ont été limités et ont surtout visé à provoquer des remboursements volontaires. En date de cet été, l'Agence du revenu du Canada avait recouvré environ 2,3 milliards de dollars. Je suis préoccupée par le manque de rigueur des activités de vérification après paiement et de recouvrement. L'Agence du revenu du Canada et Emploi et Développement social Canada doivent agir dès maintenant pour élargir leur plan de vérification après paiement afin d'y inclure tous les bénéficiaires identifiés comme à risque d'être non admissibles aux prestations. L'Agence et le ministère doivent ensuite mettre en œuvre leur plan et recouvrer les montants exigibles au titre de prestations liées à la COVID-19. The pandemic prompted the creation and delivery of income support programs never seen before in Canada. Many were up and running in a matter of weeks, where normally it would have taken months or even years. Though government organizations knew in 2020 that they would need to undertake significant post-payment work down the road, they have not adjusted their resources or plans to deal with the long-term effects of vast income support programs that were rolled out in record time. Billions of dollars have gone or may have gone to ineligible recipients. To preserve the integrity and fairness of Canada's tax system, the government is required under current legislation to take action. If it chooses a different approach, then it must be clear and transparent with Canadians. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Je suis maintenant prête à répondre à vos questions. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. If you are attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this point to ask a question.
All right, thank you for listening. And we want to reiterate this this statement that we all should be treated equally, and just because you're a woman in politics or because you're in any other type of minority in public office or an elected official, we should be looking to them for the merits of what they do for our community, and regardless of anything outside of their efforts. And especially when we go to vote, pay attention to what they've done for our community, not the party, not their gender, nor their appearance, general appearance such as skin tone, hair texture, or any of that sort of stuff. So I want to thank you at this time for listening to Depictions Media and listening to Policy and Rights. I've been your host, Michael Clogs, and I would like for you to subscribe to our show wherever it is that you're currently listening to us. Find the button. It's somewhere on your screen, and you will get continued updates from us on issues and things that are happening politically and with human rights around the world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.